we want to look at today is just how do we actually improve our presentation abilities in general. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with, I think, some tools that you are familiar with, and then just have a look at how we can improve a little bit on what we're doing there. And then we'll slowly move towards some more advanced tools that you can use. Now, today's session, as much as I prefer to have the sessions be a bit more interactive, it is going to be a little bit of a show and tell. So please pay attention to what we do. We are going to make a recording of this, and there's a lot that we want to get through. And what I'm going to do today is whatever we don't get through, I don't want to rush towards the end to try and cram everything in there that we want to cram in there. We'll make additional recordings of some of the other cool tricks that we don't get around to show you how you can make use of those things. But what we felt was quite an important thing is over the past year and a half, in general, we've seen a boom in the use of technologies to improve our teaching practice, specifically presentation, how people have migrated towards using their digital, the digital tools at their disposal, projectors, whiteboards. Some people have TVs and all sorts of things in there that they're now using to enhance what they do in the classroom. But I think it's important for us to maybe just take a step back and to think a little bit about what we are doing. So the first thing we want to tackle today is we're just going to talk about actual presentations, what we are doing, what are some of the pitfalls and things to be mindful of. Now, one of the reasons why I really think it's important to stop and talk about these things is because what we're doing is one of the great things about moving to a more digital-based way of teaching, and especially when we use the technologies in presenting what we do, is we build up an archive of things we can go back to. So it's great because all these PowerPoints and all these various notes and things that we are using are things we can use again. So underneath all of this, what we're talking about today, what's becoming incredibly important is making sure that you stay organized in your digital space. Now, whether you're on a cloud-based or whether it's on your computer, whether you're still running around with lots of flash drives or an external hard drive, whatever it is that you do, make sure that you stay organized. Make sure that you know where your things are, that when you get there in 2022 and 2023 and even in 2030, that you've built up an archive of things that you can refer back to. So that's why I want to talk about presentations quickly, because the more time we spend building these things the first time round, the easier and the better they are to use the next time. Now, that's the thing about digital tools in general. There's always a learning curve in everything that we do. When the first time that you wrote on a blackboard, it wasn't the easiest thing necessarily, and you got better at it. The first time that you started writing with Kokies, something you got better at. Presentation, same story. So we want to look at a couple of basic things. Now, the next slide I'm going to show you is an example of what we do not want to see. So let me just, get there. So this is an example of something that doesn't work. Now, you have to excuse me. I was an English home language teacher, so I just always go back to content that I'm familiar with. So there are a couple of things wrong with this presentation. One of the first things, and we're just first going to talk about those things. We won't spend too much time on these things. But the first thing that you have to keep in mind is what we are experiencing a lot of in presentations in general is something we like to call cognitive overload. In other words, as you are listening to me now, I'm sure there are a number of you that are trying to read that. And I say trying because it is not easy to listen and read at the same time. And then to make matters worse, I've decided to give you a lot of text to read, and I've used a font that's not easy to read. I've used a color that's not easy to read on a background that's busy. So there's a whole bunch of things that are not working well in this particular presentation. So please make sure that you keep in mind a couple of key things when it comes to designing your presentations. Now, the first thing that you need to keep in mind, and I'll show you this exact slide after I've given you a couple of pointers, and then I hope you'll understand what I mean by that. The first three key takeaways that you should keep when we're talking about design. The first one is substance over style. Now, often we talk about style over substance, but remember, at the end of the day, making sure your PowerPoints look nice is good because it adds a certain level of engagement that you don't get if you don't make them look good. So making sure that there's a little bit of design element involved in what you're doing, and we have other workshops where we go into how you can make that happen, but making sure it looks good is important, but less so than it being understandable. If it looks great but you can't actually read it, you can't actually see what's going on, then it doesn't help. And keep in mind the size of your presentation. You might be fortunate that you've got a big whiteboard that your entire data projector covers that easily, but you never know. Next year you might end up in a classroom where you've got a tiny little projector and a tiny little space that it's projecting on. So bigger is better with these things usually. Second thing is cognitive overload. And this is an incredibly important part. When you are presenting, a learner should be listening to what the teacher is saying. Whatever appears on the board is an additional stimulus to the practice of teaching, the listening that needs to happen. It needs to be in addition to what's happening. And a lot of what we are seeing is the opposite of that. There's a lot of text that the kids can read. If we look at that previous example that I showed you, there's a lot to read. And when you're reading and you're listening at the same time, you're not actually doing either one of these two functions well. You're not really picking up on what the teacher is saying. Obviously, there are situations where there's a lot of text that needs to go onto the board, but do it as we are doing it here. As you see, I'm introducing facts one by one. And the last thing is a PowerPoint should enhance presentation, not become substitute learner notes. Now, what I mean by that, a simple example, let's take this slide that I'm giving you here. If I were to give you this slide, it presents the key facts of what I want you to take into consideration, the three key takeaways. I give you those three key takeaways. I've simplified it and I've put it on the screen for you to see. But if I print it out as learner notes on its own, it doesn't give you all the facts that are involved in that. That's why learners still need to be writing down things and they still need to be taking down notes from the board, etc. And they can't just rely on our PowerPoints. So that's a key distinction to make, that PowerPoints on their own aren't necessarily useful as notes. Now, I'm sure we're not going to go into that function today, but this is not a session about PowerPoint as such. But PowerPoint has the option where you can make printouts of your presentation, where you've got the tiny little presentation next to it and then a bunch of lines for learners to make notes. So that's an option to have. There are a number of ways that you can go about it, but I think that's a key thing to understand. So substance over style, the ability to read and understand it is a lot more important than it looking good. Cognitive overload, if you're just going to throw everything on that slide in one shot, a lot of text, a lot of pictures, everything, it's not really going to have the same effect. Make sure things are going to arrive one by one, paragraph by paragraph, etc. And rather use more slides than everything on one slide. And then lastly, try and make sure that that your PowerPoints aren't necessarily replacing notes. Notes have a different function than a presentation. So it's a key thing to think of. Now, if I just jump back to this previous slide that we had over here, just to show you if we apply those three key things to this slide itself, we can end up with something that looks like this. So there's a little image of Shakespeare that'll draw your attention in. And then we're going to focus on the key facts. So the first thing that we said is he wrote around 37 plays. He wrote more than 150 poems, and he invented roughly 1,700 words. Now, if I was teaching you the subject, I won't stop there. I would embellish and add on to whatever it is that's displaying on the screen. So what's shown on the screen is not replacing my function as a teacher. It's adding to what I'm doing. It doesn't replace what I do. And then I can add a cute little anecdote that's not necessarily there for, it's not going to add anything to the curriculum content necessarily, but it adds a little bit of engagement and interest and excitement for the learners. And these are things that we often miss out on, but that's another thing to consider. So now what I want to look at, what I've shown you the whole time now is this presentation that you've seen fills up the screen. And that's kind of the next part of what we want to look at. And the next few things we want to look at is filling up our screen, using the entire screen real estate. Now, what you see over here is essentially what it looks like often when we open up PowerPoint. Now, a lot of the times, and it's unfortunate, I often see walk into classrooms where they show their PowerPoint like this, where it's actually not filling up the screen. And then you might end up with smaller spaces that this presentation is happening on. And especially when you're in a position where you need to actually broadcast this. So for example, what I'm doing now, where you are on your computer and you're watching it, and I know there's a couple of district officials in the session as well. When we have our meetings, when we have our online meetings, what happens is we are actually wasting so much screen space on the other side if we do this. And we don't realize how much actually. Just to show you quickly, all the parts that are highlighted here in the slight pinkish overlay that I've given it, that's wasted space. What that actually does, if you think about it, my attention as an audience member is more on, okay, what's going on the other stuff? What's happening at the other things? I want to have a look at what he's doing there. But you're not always looking at what's going on. I, for example, being into computers, etc., I often want to look down at the start menu. What are all the programs that he's got open up there? And my concentration goes completely lost, because actually that little block that you see over there is approximately 56% of the screen. You're using almost just a little bit over half of the screen for your presentation if you don't maximize what you're doing. So it really is an important thing to keep in mind, to try and do that. Now, something that happens as well sometimes, and this is just a little trick I want to show you because I've seen people running into this issue from time to time. If you've got two screens connected, so for example, you've got your data projector and you've got your laptop connected, and for some reason it accidentally switches to this kind of view, right? Where you see this and you're not sure how to get rid of it, because I want to display the thing full screen, but it's not displaying full screen now. So what can I do? Now, there are two ways to get around this issue. One of them is just to, if you are using two devices, an important thing, if you are in the position that you're using an e-beam and you want to be able to use your e-beam in PowerPoint, you have to do this. When you go to display settings, go to duplicate slideshow. What that means is both your screens will display the same thing. So your projection will show like this, and and what's on your computer will show like this. So alternatively, if you want to use this presenter view mode, but the presenter view is on the wrong device, you just go to this display settings here at the top and you just swap presenter view and slideshow. And then I've got a full screen view over here again. But if I say duplicate, what it does, duplicate makes sure that it extends and looks the same on both ends. Now again, if you're using something like the e-beam that I know many schools have, then make sure that you always go into duplicate slideshow view, because that means you can use your e-beam as a pen and it's going to actually work. If you don't do that, you're going to run into some issues. Right, now what I actually want to do now is we're going to go and look at a slightly different way of doing things. So wait, now before we get to that, I want to show you one last thing here. Let's move to the last slide. Right, so we're moving into a time where more and more people are having new tools at their disposal, like the e-beam, for example. Some people are fortunate to have your Wacom tablet. Some people are using Parrot devices. There's a whole bunch of different things. Now, what that means is we suddenly are in a position where we can add interactivity to our presentation. Not interactivity as much as we can kind of build on a slideshow in front of the classroom. So here's a simple example where I've got 4 characters over here, and PowerPoint has some built-in tools that you can use to do this. So if I right-click then I can go to my pointer options and I can change it to a pen or a highlighter, and I can change my ink color. I can change a number of things. It is a little bit limited, I know. So you can't always do everything that you want to do, but the principle that we want to apply here is going to be the same. So what I've done here is I've created a kind of template for myself. I've got my 4 characters, so I don't need to draw a picture of Romeo or Juliet or write out their names or anything anymore. Here I've got them. So now when I'm explaining things about them, I've got this on the board, and I can still use my PowerPoint, and I can actually do annotations on my PowerPoint. So these two love each other. Now I'm trying to do this with a mouse, so it doesn't always work nearly as well as it should. And then I can draw an arrow over here, and I can write that they are cousins. As you can see, writing with a mouse is not ideal. So you understand what I mean. But the same principle, if you're standing in front of a classroom and you've got an e-beam with you, you can do this with your e-beam. So you're creating a template that you can build on, that you can continue working with. And your templates can be any level of complexity that you want, depending on what you want to use. And there's a couple of tools in here that you can play around with, your pen and your highlighter. So the highlighter is, of course, very useful if there's a bunch of text and you want to just highlight certain things for them and draw their attention to certain parts of it. It becomes a very powerful tool in that sense. Right, so what we want to look at now is a slightly different thing that you can do as well, where you've got a lot of the functionality of PowerPoint without actually losing that much of the display. Now remember, what you see in front of you here, when I look at this block that I've got, now I've got the ability to drag things around, which is great. So that gives me a couple of extra functions and tricks that I can do. So I can easily go and I can move Romeo and Juliet together and say now they started, this is where they fell in love. And then Tybalt saw them, but Tybalt didn't like what he saw over there. Mercutio and Tybalt had a fight, etc. And then Mercutio unfortunately died. Romeo went after Tybalt. Tybalt was here and Tybalt died. I think you get the idea what I mean. So you add your own little interactivity to what you're doing, but this is still only happening on 58% or 56% of the screen. Now, I want to show you a cool little trick that you can do to use more of the screen here. So in PowerPoint, and this is going to be different in different versions of PowerPoint, of course, so they don't all work the same. But one of the first tools that you can use that people often use is just hiding this ribbon. So you're right at the top. Let me show you another trick that I think is a very useful thing to be able to use. And that is our cursor size. So let me change that. So if you actually just click on Start, you'll see there's an option to change your mouse pointer. There's lots of different ways to do it. This is by far the easiest way to do it. So literally, if you click on the Start menu and you just start typing mouse pointer, then you'll see there's an option, change mouse pointer size and color. So if I want to make sure people see what's going on, I'll just drag it over here so you can see. There's the first option is just change that size. So we'll make it nice and big. And we'll give it a yellow color or whatever color you would like. Yellow often stands out against most backgrounds. So now you can easily follow my cursor and see where it's going. So over there is a little ribbon button. So if you click on that ribbon button, it hides the ribbon. So now I've got more space up that's opened up already. Over here, if I move my mouse to this point, I can go and I can minimize this to the point that it actually goes away. So there's more space for me as well. Now, if you want to get your ribbon back and you want to be able to do certain things, all that you need to do is you need to go to your insert and it'll pop up. But you can take it away again by just going, and then we can just use that pin again to make sure it sticks again. So insert, and there's the pin, and then it sticks. To get even more display out of it, although I'm not sure if it's really necessary to get even more, here at the top, you'll see there's a ribbon display options right at the top next to your minimize, maximize, and close buttons. If I click on that, there's an option that says auto hide ribbon. Now, if I do that, it takes virtually everything away. Right, so you can see basically everything is now taken away. And this is kind of looking like a PowerPoint, but I still have my interactive options available for me. And again, if I've got a just want to double check, Selma, are you still, I see you say the slideshow has stopped. Is everyone still seeing the screen correctly? Sorry, I don't have someone running the chat for me. Okay, great. Still working. So now if I actually still want to access my tools, I can go even further, and I can, if we really want to go all the way, we can hide our taskbar as well. So then we automatically hide the taskbar, and then now we've gone to the wrong thing. Sorry. Right, so now this is basically a presentation that you have, and you've still got your option to scroll between different things if you need to, and then just take it away again. And now what's quite nice is I've got my options to go and insert, for example, let's say I want to draw a little connector line between these two. So now I've got my connector line. I'm going to draw a connector line, and there I'm connecting these two to each other with a line. I can go and I can say I want to insert a text box, for example, and we're going to insert a little text box over here. And now we can say she's a 13-year-old. Sorry, typing's gone. 13-year-old. And we can, for example, add all of these little things. So now what's nice is you can open the discussion for the class, and you create something that's essentially an interactive PowerPoint where you are adding things to the PowerPoint. Obviously, when you're designing your own PowerPoint, I don't recommend using this view. But when you are essentially building a PowerPoint in a way in front of the classroom, then this works very well because it still looks like a PowerPoint without having all those extra things around it. And you're using far more than 56% of the screen size. So it's a nice little thing that you can play around with when you're preparing for next year, or maybe in your last few lessons that you've still got coming up this year. It's just this little trick where you really are supercharging your presentations. I mean, you can build a basic template and then just leave little blocks open and then ask the learners what they think, and you can type things in front of them. The problem with this, of course, the one thing that's not so nice of doing it this way necessarily is you do become a little bit stuck behind your computer, stuck to your keyboard and your mouse and things like that. So managing that becomes a new challenge. There's a different kind of approach that you need to keep in mind when you're doing something like that. But this is something that's quite useful to play around with. But again, if you want to get your PowerPoint to kind of look like normal again, if this is starting to concern you a little bit, just go back to that button here at the top, and then you just say show tabs and commands, and we'll just open this up again, and suddenly you've got PowerPoint back the way that you are used to it, right? And then the start menu, if we just want to bring that one back, I'm using the double display now, so it does things a little bit differently. We'll just bring it back, and there I've got my start bar again. Right, but I actually want to stick to this kind of presentation because the next thing we want to look at is PowerPoint is only one thing that we use a lot of. Let's keep this thing nice and small. Auto-driven, we'll keep it like that. Right, so PowerPoint is one thing that I think a lot of teachers spend a lot of time on. Another thing that people use a lot is a PDF. Now, most of the time when I see teachers using PDFs, I'll see them opening it up something like this. Most teachers understand how we can zoom in and zoom out, so that is usually not too much of a problem. But remember, the same thing still applies. I've got all of this wasted space over here. I've got all of this wasted space over here, which is not adding to, and sometimes it's even, they have this whole sidebar still open all the way like that. Now you can go and close some of these things up, and that already focuses the attention a little bit. There's a couple of things, more things that you can do, but there's one key thing that works the best of the lot, and that is if you go over to View and you go to full screen mode. Now the shortcut key is Ctrl L, but it's one of those things that Ctrl L doesn't make a lot of sense, so no one really remembers that. But if you just click on View, full screen mode, suddenly I've got something that looks like that. Now no one can read what's going on there. Now I'm going to start looking for where's my minus and my plus and these buttons. I can't get to anything. What now? So when you need to zoom in and things like that, The easiest is hold down the control button and then use your mouse wheel. Right? If you use your mouse wheel, you'll zoom in to any point that you want. So you can actually go and you can zoom in even further. And now we've zoomed in on only Othello, and I can talk about Othello. And by clicking and dragging, I move around to different parts of the PowerPoint. So you can see how zoomed in I can get when I really want to focus on only one part. Because remember when we spoke about cognitive overload, PDFs are, unfortunately, as great as they are, PDFs are, unlike a PowerPoint, actually primarily meant for notes. Now, when we go through things like when we present things like question papers, etc., then what we often see is we'll end up using a PDF. So there's definitely a use for a PDF. Please make sure that when I say these things, I'm not trying to say the one is bad and the other one is great, and use this one, etc., etc. It's important to understand the function that the different ones have. But if I am presenting a PDF, then I might as well do it to the best of its ability. And this full screen reader mode is definitely a great way to use it. So if I am able to do this, depending on the tools that you are using in your classroom, annotations are a little bit more tricky because it doesn't have built-in annotation tools. There are other PDF readers that you can play around with and explore that do have them. Unfortunately, I can't install any of them at the moment to showcase some of them, but there are a couple of other options out there. But PDF readers in general, it's a bit of an expensive thing often. But zooming in like this, I'm sure you can already see, if you've ever used a PDF in your classroom, that this is going to work a lot better for your learners than just the old way of doing it. Now, if you're done, you just press escape and then you'll go back to the normal PDF reader. So there is the easiest way to make a PDF a lot more effective in terms of presentation. So again, there's the PDF. I'll go to view and I'll go to full screen mode. Now I'm using Adobe because Adobe is kind of the standard, in the industry standard when it comes to these things. So this is the one we often use. So we'll go to full screen mode and then we'll have the whole thing and then hold down the control button and the mouse wheel and it'll zoom in. If you don't have a mouse wheel, then the same can be achieved by holding down control and pressing plus. Plus for zooming in, minus zooms out. And then, yes, right, so plus zooms in, minus zooms out. And in general, with many programs, that's kind of a default thing. Holding down the control button, plus is zoom, minus is zoom out. Or mouse wheel up, mouse wheel down is zoom in and zoom out. Because, again, very useful to fill up the screen with whatever it is that we are doing. Right, and then to get out of it, escape. Usually escape is kind of a good thing, good way to get out of things. There's a couple of shortcut keys that are universal to many programs, and those are some of them. Now, the last one I also want to look at is Word, which is another one that's also very, very popular to present from, right? So, sorry, mine is already a little bit fixed like that. Right, so typically when we open up Word, it might not even be, I think I've already zoomed in a bit too much. Again, control plus, control minus gets us to where we normally are. Right, now if you open up Word, Word has so many different viewing modes, and depending on what the last one is that you used, that is the one that it will open up in default. And you can play around with the different ways of using it. You'll see there's a couple of options here at the bottom, the kind of default one that we're working in. And one of the themes that you'll pick up that we talk about often is there's a different view for the programs when you work in them and when you present them. And in general, when we are presenting, we're not used to that second option, the presenting mode of it. We're very used to the mode that we use when we work on it. But it's becoming increasingly important to be mindful of both sides of the coin, because it's a different world. It's a new way of looking at these things. How do we make sure that we can really get the most out of these tools? And that is by understanding both sides to it. Now, the same with PowerPoint and Word and Adobe. It's going to depend on the version that you have, but these are becoming pretty standard functions that you can have in most of these things. So like we had with PowerPoint, you also have the ability to, over here at the top, go and hide the ribbon. If you click on that, it'll take that part away and you'll have only this part left. And then one thing that is a little bit frustrating about this one is it doesn't have the same kind of option of just showing it again, but you still have that little ribbon display option. Now, I think the ribbon display option might be a little bit newer. So if you're working in an older Word, you won't necessarily have that. But we can use the exact same trick here, and we can go auto hide ribbon and we get a full screen view of what's going on here. Hold down your control button and then go plus, plus, plus. Now it's not going in the right direction. Now for some reason it doesn't want to. Oh yes, sorry. This one works a little bit differently. So when we are already in this kind of collapsed ribbon mode, when I try to zoom in and out, then it doesn't quite give me the same effect. So what usually works better is when I'm still in my normal mode that I have over here. If you just go and zoom in to the point where you want to be zoomed into, there you go. I want to have a nice full page. It needs to show me everything. So now I'm seeing side to side the whole page, and then I go to this auto hide ribbon and I've got a very full screen and it'll display the entire screen. So the whole point of both the PowerPoint and the trick that we're using in PowerPoint and in Word and as well in the PDF as well, is it's all about maximizing the screen usage. Right, now when we want to switch between the two, something else I want to show you as well, and this is another way that I've seen people often use it. There's another mode of using Word called focus. Here at the bottom, you'll see there's a little focus button there next to the display settings, etc. Just ignore that part. You've got the focus, and then you've got your zoom controls and things are there at the bottom. If you forget about that, you can also go here at the top to view, and then you'll see there's a bunch of different options here, where you can change the way that you are reading that it's being displayed. So this is, in all honesty, when I get a Word document that I know I only need to read this Word document, I actually want to focus on doing it, then the word focus is a good thing to keep in mind, because focus really just clears away everything. There's no start bar, there's nothing else on here that you can see, right? Again, if you move it will bring these things in, of course, because if you move it right to the top, you'll see some controls do come back. But the idea of focus is it really just focuses you in on the thing. So personally, I think this is an even better way than using the ribbon, because it really takes away all the clutter and just puts your Word document on the screen. All of it 100% that people can see what's going on. And you don't even have your start bar at the bottom, which is great. So now you can go through this and you've got your normal options to kind of go and select things. If you want to use your highlighter, you can highlight it. You can go and change things to bold. If you want to emphasize certain things, you can select it and change your font size, all those different little tools, and everything else in Word is still going to be there. You'll just have to move here to the top, and then you've got your normal insert functions where you can add shapes and lines and add tables. So you can have the same kind of effect that you have that I showed you in the PowerPoint, you can do in Word as well. Now, the problem is when we want to switch between these things, I've got a full screen mode up here in my Word, and I actually like it. I want to keep it full screen. And now I want to switch to my PDF, for example. But the only way that I can get to my PDF now is I have to go escape, go out of my full screen mode, go to my PDF, again, go to view, go to full screen mode. Now I'm in full screen mode. And here, now I'm in my PDF, but now I want to talk about something in my Word document. I have to go escape again, etc., etc. And this becomes frustrating, and it really, it can kind of, when we're doing an online presentation, especially for me, it's something that often looks a little bit jarring when people are jumping between documents like I'm showing you now. And then what happens is, because it becomes a difficult switch to do, we just don't use the full screen view anymore. We'll just keep it like this so that I can have my start menu, I can click on that, and then I'm there, and then I'm there. And now that whole approach of having a full screen view falls away. So in order to get around that, I'm going to show you two ways to do it. The one way is the more traditional way. Gilbert and myself, my colleague in e-learning, we spoke about it today, and we are both very much used to the one way of doing it, which is the traditional way. But in all honesty, I think the other way might actually be an easier way to do it. So first things first, if I've got this, I'll go to my view mode and I'll go to full screen. So I've got my full screen set up. I'll zoom in. But now when I want to switch to the other one, I can use Alt Tab. Now the Alt Tab, sorry, let me just quickly think. I'm going to get this to display on your side. Now what Alt Tab does is Alt Tab switches to a different window. So in order to understand how the window thing works, is every program runs in its own window. PowerPoint is a little bit different, because when you present a PowerPoint, it creates a second window, which is now the PowerPoint presentation. I'll show that to you in a minute as well. When we hold the Alt key, but we have to hold down the Alt key and press Tab, it opens up a selection where I can then just press Tab a few times to essentially go through the options that I have and select the one that I want. And then when I release the Tab button, the one that I want will open up. Now you're not seeing that on your end because my Alt Tab display is opening on my other screen, right? So it's not working as perfectly as but I want to show you a different way that you can do it as well. That is now a new feature that you can use. If you press the Windows key and you press Tab, then it opens up a screen. I hope you can see the screen that's showing now. But if you press the Windows key and the Tab button, it'll open up the different windows that you have. And then using your mouse, you select the one that you want to use. So it's a little less smooth because it brings, there's a window that opens up in between. But it is also a little bit more controlled because you can easily make sure that you select the right thing. So if you've got two windows open, for example, jumping from one thing to the next thing becomes easy. If you've got 20, 30 PowerPoint open, when I go to, and it's actually easier to use Alt Tab to find the right one because there's a visual display of that PowerPoint happening. Just quickly in the chat, can you tell me, did you see the pane that opened up now when I could select between my different screens, or didn't you see that? Yes, Alt Tab is a lifesaver. Okay, so you could see it. Fantastic. So that's a different way of doing it. I'm also more of an Alt Tab, used to Alt Tab, but there's a very definite when people are not used to Alt Tab, the Windows tab can sometimes also be quite useful. So Windows tab allows me to open up different windows. For those of you a little bit more advanced, I'll just tell you, have a look, there's a very, very cool tool that you could also use called New Desktop. But I'm not even going to tell you what that is. Go and explore it yourself. It's been there for a long time, but not a lot of people use it. So now essentially what's going to happen, I'll take my Word document and I'll go to my Word document and put it into focus mode. Right, so they've got my Word document is full. I've got my PDF, which is nice and zoomed in. And I've got my PowerPoint, and there I've got my PowerPoint as well. This PowerPoint, I'm using an interactive one now. So now I can actually seamlessly talk about this and switch to my my PowerPoint or my PDF document. And then from there, I can switch to my Word document without really having to go through that process of zooming in and zooming out and going into focus mode and going out of focus mode, etc., etc. So a really powerful way of being able to present and maximizing your screen. But again, what this requires, for a teacher to do is to make sure you've got the various documents that are going to be forming part of your presentation open and ready to go before the lesson actually starts. That's one thing you need to keep in mind. In terms of when we are going to do an online presentation, whether it's going to be through Teams or through Meet or through Zoom or through any platform, all of them have two or a couple of distinct different presentation modes, but the two primary ones that they have, the one being share your screen, the other one being share a window. So the nice thing now is I've been doing this entire presentation sharing my screen, which is something I almost never do because I prefer not to share my screen. Specifically for the fact that I don't want people to see those little things that are happening in between. So this is a nice way of making sure that you can still share your screen, which means that if things go wrong, you can quickly open up a new file and drag it onto your screen, and then you're still fine. But it presents a more seamless kind of presentation. There's no kind of we are getting stuck in between, etc. Right. Are you all still with me? Is everyone still? Are there any questions at this point? Because now I want to move into the things that might be a little bit new and different to some of you. Moving more into the way that I present, because if I'm going to be completely honest, these are not tools that I personally use really, but I know these are the tools that are most common amongst our teachers. Right, and I hope you are learning something as well at the same time. That's the most important thing really. We are obviously at the conclusion of this whole training. We're going to we'll send you the recording. What my intention is, depending on time, is I want to split this recording into the more traditional tools and then slightly more modern tools. Now, we don't have a lot of time to get into that, so we might end up having to do most of that as a recording afterwards, but let's dive into that as well. Right, so now I'll move over to the way that I tend to present, and that is using primarily Google as my presentation tool. Right, so that already was just a slide that we had over there. We're just going to close that one, our welcoming screen, and there's just a couple of different things. Now, let's start with, and we're going to go through all three in the same way. We're going to go through the equivalent of PowerPoint, of Word, and of slides, just doing it in on the Google platform, and then there's one very important, really just puts it over the edge for me. So first things first, here we've got our slide. Now, when you're going to be presenting a slide, a useful little trick to keep in mind, because Chrome works a little bit differently. In this instance, we're not going to open up multiple windows. So you won't have PowerPoint in one window, Word in one window, and your PDF in one window. You'll have all of these things opened up in multiple tabs, right? So you can see at the top, I've got my example presentation, my example content, and that one is actually a PDF. So I've got the three documents open here at the top in tabs, and then I've got some other tabs open here as well. Now let's start with a slide. So slides by default, if I press the present key, it's going to fill up the screen. So that's the easiest way of making sure you're filling up the screen. Here we go. Screen is nice and filled up. But you can do the same thing that you can do with PowerPoint in terms of the interactive tools that you add to it. This one's a little bit different though. You don't have the same. I can collapse the ribbon. That's one thing I can do. So collapsing the ribbons in general is a good thing, but this doesn't actually allow me to make that part smaller. Here I can only take it to a certain point, and then it doesn't allow me to make it even smaller. So there's a couple of things here that I'm more limited with. And in general, what you have to understand with a lot of the Google tools, they have fewer options, but they've got all the important options. It's kind of like they cut away some of the fluff. And that which you find you still need that's not in there, for that you can use extensions. And the extensions really can do wonderful things for you. So let's look at the first extension that is very useful to use in, before we get to our extension. Right, the first thing that I want to, Sophia, I'll have to get back to you on that, because generally I found that the videos play quite well in slides and Teams, but we'll have to look into that one. I'm not 100% sure why that didn't happen. We'll just test that again. So what I want to show you here, like we've got hiding ribbons, etc. There's a couple of important things to do when you are in Chrome to make your whole presentation a little bit more effective. The first thing is your bookmarks bar. People don't necessarily need to see that bookmarks bar, because that bookmarks bar is, again, you have to think of it in two ways. There's the way that you work in it. If I'm actively working, my bookmarks bar is always open. If I'm not actively working, then I close my bookmarks bar for presentation purposes. So your bookmarks bar, if you just right click on it, you can easily show it and hide it. If you hide it, then it goes away. If you need to get it back, the easiest way is just to remember Control open up your bookmarks bar again. Alternatively, you can go here to the settings where you'll be able to hide your bookmark bar as well. Right, so there's the bookmarks bar. We'll take it away. Then the next thing that is important is using full screen mode. Again, if we go here to the options, you'll see there's the zoom option and there's the full screen mode. So if I go full screen, it takes away some of the ribbons. It takes away the start menu and it takes away the top part, which also shows me my tabs. But if I'm only working in one tab, in this instance, the slide, then that's nice. I want to get that out of the way. But for now, I just want to bring back that part. And if you are uncertain, if you get stuck in this mode and you're not sure how to get out of it, just hover here to the top. You'll see there's a little close button and it'll bring back Chrome, the rest of the Chrome part that you want. Now, a very useful extension. And again, the links to these extensions, I'm going to include them in the email to the participants at the end of the session. Very useful extension is when I use this extension, full screen interactive Google Slides. So if I do that, what it does is it takes away these various ribbons. I'll take that away and you'll see we end up with something that kind of looks exactly like the PowerPoint that we talked about. The one thing that I like more about this is my controls here at the top are easier to access. So my little connectors, for example, they're easier to get to. My text box is easier to find. All of these little tools are just easier to get to find, to add an image. If I want to add an image quickly, I'll search the web and we'll just find an image of the nurse, for example. And there I've got my image of, well, not that nurse necessarily, but yes, there we have. So it's just a little bit more seamless and quicker to do this way. So that's a nice way of presenting the interactive thing. And I personally think slides is a little bit better than PowerPoint with that, simply because these tools are easier to get to. And it's got a couple of nice, easier built-in things that you can add. PowerPoint has more tools, but these are easier and more straight and more to the point sometimes. So that's one thing that works very well. So similar to what we had in the other one. But now, again, now I'm stuck in this mode and my Alt tab, Windows tab, those things are not going to work because that switches a window. It doesn't switch a tab. But that's okay. Switching a tab is quite easy. We just use the Control Tab option now. So Alt tab is for my Windows. Control Tab switches the tabs on my in Google Chrome. So I'm over here and I can move there. Now, one thing that is very annoying about the Google Slides, what's different is once I've taken away all of these tools, these things, and I want to get them back, the only way to do that is to reload your presentation. So you'll have to reload it and then it'll open up again the presentation right from where I was. So that is a little bit annoying and it's something you need to get used to and something you need to play around with when you try and incorporate it. One thing that I forgot to show you as well, Google Chrome works like all the other things, Control plus and minus or Control mouse wheel. Okay, mouse wheel might do something a little bit different in this instance, but mouse wheel is going to zoom you in, zoom you out. Control plus and minus will move you, will do the same thing. So here we've got our slide, our Google Doc. We can do essentially the same thing that we do with Word. We can go to View and Full Screen, and it gives us a pretty full screen view. All that we need to do here is we just need to make sure that we go into the full screen mode here as well, and then you end up with a full screen viewing. Control and zoom in, and then you'll get to a full screen mode where you can edit and write. This one, I'll have to be honest, I think the Word one might be a little bit nicer. What I do like that the Google Docs does offer is it gives you this automatic table of contents where you can jump around in your different parts in Google Doc. So that's quite a nice one. If you've got a lengthy thing and you need to jump to certain parts, is you've got the table of contents. In order to get that table of contents, oh yes, sorry, that is figures of speech, my bad. But if you are looking at in order to use your table of contents, just make sure that the text that you insert, that you're using the header options, header 1, header 2, header 3, and it automatically generates this table of contents. So that's quite a nice way of being able to present that part. And again, if you need to get back to your full viewing, escape will get that. Escape is going to bring back your ribbon at the top, your controls. Moving your mouse to the top gets you that little close button, which can sometimes jump away. That's why I always remember the shortcut F11. Right, so F11 will also bring back the part here at the top. Part of what we'll send you once I've had the time to compile all of these notes, it's just a couple of notes on the shortcuts and links to download some of the tools. Then the last one, PDF. PDF works essentially the same as all these things. Once we've got it opened up, we just go into full screen mode, full screen mode, which is F11, and then we've got a full screen PDF open here. Right, and then using Ctrl Tab, we can switch between these things. So essentially the same setup as that we have with the different windows. But now I want to show you something that for me really adds a lot of value in what you can do here. And that is when we use tab grouping. So say, for example, I've got my 30 minutes at the beginning of the day or my 10 minutes, 50 minutes. I just want to open up the various bits of content that I'm going to be using. And now I need to organize it. And sometimes it can get a bit crazy. I've seen where there's 20 different presentations open and PDFs and Word docs and everything. And it becomes, I don't sometimes know how people are sure where they need to go. So when we do that, the tab grouping, let me show you how that works. For every tab, if I right click on a tab, I can say add tab to a new group. So I'll create a new group. We'll make it red and I'll call this my grade 10, for example. Then I've got a grade 10 tab group. Now I'll take all of the content, right click, add to grade 10, add to grade 10. So there I've got my grade 10 group, which doesn't seem particularly useful now, but if I click on that, I'll collapse it all. And now I could potentially take this and add, and I'll say a new, sorry, where's a new group? We'll call this grade 11. And we'll add this one to the grade 11 group. So now I'm actually creating these different groups. I can collapse the grade 11 one. I've got my grade 10 one. And then if I have another tab here to the end, I'll collapse all of them. So here I'm actually opening up. I've got all of the different things that I need for my grade 10s. I've got all the different things I need for my grade 11s. Websites, PowerPoints in the form of slides, you name it. And of course, if you're using PowerPoints, you can use Office 365 PowerPoints as well. That's going to work perfectly fine. You can use, with your WCG schools, you all have access to Office 365. So you all have access to that online PowerPoint option. And what's very nice, what I like about this now is if I've got my grade 10s that are moving into my class, I right click on that and I say move group to new window. So when I do that, I essentially have a group that's only going to have my grade 10 stuff on it. I'm not going to get confused with my other tabs. I've only got my grade 10s over here. So once the grade 10s leave my class and I'm done teaching them, I can now decide, let's close this. Or alternatively, if I don't want to close it, if I click and hold there and I drag, I actually drag it out and you'll see at the back, there's my original Chrome window still open. And I'll drag it into that. And there we go. Now it's part of that again. And I can click on that and I'll close it again. So in that way, I can organize things quite well before learners come in. It's all about the kind of preparation that I'm not falling over my feet to find my notes and to organize my notes and to have it ready for them. So this is a very, very useful way, I think, of organizing these things and being able to switch between them. Because when we've got that option, I can click it out, I drag it out, and there it is, available for me to quickly use my Ctrl Tab options to switch between the different windows that I'm using, right? So for me, this is great, especially when it comes to online presentation, because now I use the share my window and not share my screen, and I share my Chrome window. Now, the nice thing about that, when I share my Chrome window, I can actually show you this, but move it out of the way and go and do things on this Chrome window, and you will be none the wiser of what I'm actually doing. I can open up multiple things and I can work in Teams. I can go to Teams. Teams can be running in the background. Then people don't have to see this part of it the whole time. This is not going to be shown. They don't see what happens there. And this, again, all of it is about focusing the attention to that which matters, the key things. Now, we have 3 minutes left. Explain how to install this. I'm not going to go into all the various details, but I really want to show you one of my absolute favorite tools when using Google Chrome, and that is Annotate.net. It's a pretty new tool. Let's open it up. Right, so Annotate.net is a tool that allows me to write on any website. Now, because the Google system and the Google environment, all of it is web-based, I can write on any of it. So here I'm going to show you first what it looks like, because there is a downside that we'll get to now. So here I've got the ability to write anything over there, whatever I want to write over there, and I can write it, and it actually works quite well. Again, this works brilliantly if you've got using an e-beam and you're standing in front of your class and you're using these writing tools and not the built-in e-beam tools. If you're using a Wacom tablet, it's going to work just as well. If you are using a stylus, or if you've got whatever the tools are that you're using, if you've got some kind of writing tool, this works unbelievably well. With a pen, of course, you need to try and write, which is not always the easiest thing to do. One gets better at it over time, but it'll never be ideal. But for simple marking purposes, it works great. Right, now, the real magic in this is when I start scrolling, whatever I've done is sticky. So a lot of the things give me the option to write on this, but it doesn't stick to whatever I'm writing on. I have to scroll, and then it'll actually scroll with what I'm doing. So here it sticks. It sticks perfectly well on a Google Doc when I'm using a Google Doc. And then when I just want to remove it, I'll just click there, it takes it away. In a slide, it'll do the same thing. I'm actually curious to see what it's going to do now. Yes, it'll do the same thing. So whenever I'm moving around, it sticks to the slide that it's happening on. When I go into my presentation mode and I actually want to present my slide, you'll see my Annotate.net remains, and there I've still got all my different tools. Right, highlighter, pen, eraser, and then text box, etc., etc. Now, the big drawback of Annotate.net, unfortunately, is there's a free version. I'm using the paid for version, so I've got extra features. The free version basically restricts you to writing in black and highlighting in yellow. That's what it does. So the paid for version gives you the extra functions. It's really not a very expensive tool. If it's something that you want to look at, I'm not going to promote it as something you should get, because up until this morning, I was only using Annotate.net, those two options, having either the yellow highlighter or the option to write with the black pen, and that was okay for me. But I can understand having multiple colors and the ability to change the thickness and things like that adds a lot of value to it, of course. So it's something that is definitely something to look into. And of course, what's also what makes this great is it works very well on websites as well. So let's just quickly drag this one in here again. So for example, our e-learning website, any website that you're using, you have the ability to draw on any website and it'll stick to wherever it is that you are drawn on it and scroll with it. So if I highlight this part and I select, that's the one part that is a little bit annoying, I'll be honest, is that every time I need to scroll or need to do something else, I first need to select my pointer again. Otherwise, it doesn't interact with the website in any other way. So you'll see these things actually stick to where it is. And that's a great part of it. The very last thing, I know we are over our time, please forgive me. But I think this is a nice, yes, Samia, I'll send you all the links in a recording, but what you can do is you can just look for annotate.net. That's the thing's name, and they're all Chrome extensions, adding extra stuff to what your Chrome can do. On a PDF, it's a little bit different, annotate.net. It's interesting because this is where annotate.net actually got started, was the ability to write on a PDF. So when you do that, when you click write on a PDF, it actually opens it up in a different kind of, it kind of looks the same. It opens a slightly different view of the PDF. Let's give it a second. And I'll show you one very basic, but I found one very useful feature. So when it opens up in this PDF, let's just go to full screen mode again. And that is F11. In full screen mode, if you open up a PDF on Chrome, you'll see this side panel here. Sometimes people are not entirely sure where to go to get rid of it. You just click on that little burger over there and it'll go away and you can bring it back if you need to. But what's quite nifty about annotate.net, what it does here is you've got the option of actually adding a blank page, which I think is a great thing, very, very cool tool to have. And then something that's very useful is if you've got this. Now, there's one thing I would love them to change, but if I've got this over here, and I find I want space to write, they've got these controls that allow me to just add space to the side or to the bottom. And I can add as much space as I want. So if I'm going to zoom out, look at how much space I've added to my basic PDF in order to make the notes that I need to make. So I can have my PDF over there. And again, these are ways that we need to reimagine the way in which we are presenting and the way that which we are doing things. So I've got this PDF over here. And I can use, by using my arrows moving left and right, I can actually go and add whatever I want to add in over here using annotate.net, writing whatever I want to do, highlighting as much as I want. You've got the text option, of course, where I can go and say hi, add things like that. You can do all of that over here. One thing that I can show you as well that's quite nice is you've got the option to highlight certain things like that as well. So again, overall, just a very nice tool that adds a lot of functionality, I think, to web presentation. Now, there are things similar to this on desktops that you can use, but a lot of them don't have that sticky kind of thing where they stay wherever it is. And if you do a lot of these notes, you can have them as part of your presentation, etc., at a later stage. But with that said, we're going to stop there. We called it the Tech Hour because we want to try and stick to an hour's presentation. And something that I didn't talk about at the beginning is the whole idea of these sessions that we have now. We're going to chop it up into shorter videos, hopefully over time, so that they become smaller snippets of tricks and tools and things you can use to really build on the skills that you developed in 2020 and 2021. Because our big goal from Cape Winelands is we want to figure out what is the next step, because we really want to look at transformative pedagogies, changing our teaching practice from what we are doing now to really move into a new digitally enhanced, technologically enhanced kind of teaching practice. Start with a present, whether we use technology for teaching, but that's not where we're going to stop. We really want to look at how do we engage the learners in a more direct manner. So please, if you haven't registered for the other sessions, then go and do so. Register for those sessions. Join us. I'm sure they're going to be fruitful sessions. I know this one was the one that has had the most interest for. Please tell your colleagues about these sessions that they can join in. And if they missed it, share the videos with them, etc. Because I'm sure there's a lot of interesting, useful tools that we have that we could show you today. Have a great afternoon, everyone.